Welcome back, everybody, to another edition of Sabres Chat. This is, I believe, episode 25, only the second episode on our own Bills Chat YouTube. I am, of course, Luka. Well, I guess I should go this way, Luka. There's only one thing to really discuss this week. Um, a- how do I put it this way? There's only one thing to discuss this week. I can cover a little bit of other things. It only feels right. It's not like there is only one thing happening in the NHL entirely. This isn't the off season yet. But of course, the title of this episode, what is going on this week in the NHL, is most pertinent. It is the NHL trade deadline. And unfortunately for the Sabres, of course, this year doesn't seem as uncertain in the sense of last year at this time, there was an excitement and an excitement with the uncertainty that was, could the Sabres bring someone in? Who are they going to bring in? What can they do to tinker with this roster to potentially get over that hump and finally make the playoffs for the first time in what seems like forever? They ended up trading for Jordan Greenway, still on the roster, doing good things at times. Goes through his own slumps. They currently have him playing on that top line with Tage and Tuck, which is just a whole bunch of size. It's not exactly um, unsuccessful, I will say. It seems to work. I think Greenway kind of is still just, even at this point in his career, not entirely comfortable with where his spot is and what his abilities are and things of that nature. Hopefully it works out with all of that. But this year, plain and simple, we're sellers. The Buffalo Sabres are going to be sellers at the deadline. The question becomes just how big of sellers are they going to be? And tonight or whenever you are listening to this, whether it's Wednesday, thank you for returning and everything of that, and or later on, if you are listening to this following the NHL trade deadline one, please feel free in the comments at Sabres Chat Pod on Twitter or X, whatever you like to call it. Roast me for anything I may have said that seems to have been a cold take, old take, whatever you want to call it, just a bad one. And or stick around to the end where I will actually have a final thought of the podcast that is not about the trade deadline and is just continuing on another topic that I like to discuss with this team and kind of what I ideally would like to see the next big move be for the Sabres, and hopefully then finding success and actually getting to that prized possession known as the playoffs. So, real quick, since I last recorded, there has been a few games. And honestly, the one thing that has happened in the positive is they've actually put together a good run of games of late. And from when I recorded last, I want to say it was the Ducks game. I'm pulling up the schedule here. That's kind of where I was stalling a little bit in the beginning part of the episode. Yeah, I want to say the last game that was played, if I'm doing my math right here, was the Monday night President's Day afternoon matinee game where they just kind of laid an egg a little bit late against the Ducks, and Eric Johnson, who will probably be coming up later on in this episode, just put on a all-time performance of "Get me the hell out of here" or "I am useless," whatever you want to call it. Since then, they've actually won 5 of 7. And in all reality, those two losses, now the latest one, the Winnipeg game, where they were up 2-1, and it's like you would love to see this team, if you're just trying to look at game by game, getting better again, even though this team seems to only play well when there's nothing on the line, and there's that whole ordeal. But if you just want to try to get enjoyment somewhere, or at least see this team find success at some point this season, even if it's not going to get to the ultimate goal that was there for this year, you would like to see them lock down a lead going into the third. They didn't do that. Winnipeg, who started out, it looked like a little slow in the legs, and the Sabres were jumping on them a little bit early on, especially in the first period. In that third period, it was a total role reversal. And honestly sitting there in the arena, it was readily apparent from the opening drop of the third period that Winnipeg's legs were there and they were hustling to everything. They were beating the Sabres to every single puck. They were just on top of everything. And lo and behold, they scored four unanswered, including one empty netter and then a goal after that to make it that four unanswered to win 5-2. If you kind of asterisk that one, because that 2-1 performance, it was back-to-back nights, and if you wanted to just kind of focus in on the Sabres, that third period, they may have found tired legs. It's no excuse because what I didn't even say it before, but Winnipeg was coming in after a win in Carolina the night before themselves. So there is zero excuse for any of this, but overall, they did kind of find a way to lose. Prior to that, a 7-2 win against Vegas, a 3-2 thrilling overtime win against Tampa. The quality loss, we'll call it 3-2 against a very, very, very good Florida team this year. And then wins against Carolina, Columbus, and Montreal in a row. And the Columbus one, especially since I was there, it was a grind fest and a half against a very ugly team in Columbus. And that's not a game that this roster is accustomed to winning. It's not one that they're used to being able to take control of and actually seeing it through, but they did. The story throughout all of this as well is essentially UPL. UPL may have let in a couple leaky ones against Winnipeg, but outside of that, UPL's been very, very strong. And we continue to see that it looks like UPL is going to be a number one goaltender for this roster. Um, we have found a guy. It's a little funny that it's not the one that a lot of people wanted it to be going into this year, but that's at least nice in itself. Now, with these stretch of games, there was a little bit in the back of my mind that had me fearful that based on comments that general manager Kevin Adams made, I want to say a couple months ago now at this point, maybe when the first rumblings and discussions about trade deadline, have you looked ahead at trade deadline? I guess it would probably more likely be at the beginning of February. And he made a comment that essentially said, we will not be making moves and selling players until we are absolutely out of the playoffs. And basically was saying that until they are mathematically eliminated, they are not looking at this as if it's a lost season and or are going to be just selling players off because of it for future assets and having the remainder of the season as open tryouts. One, in my opinion, very flawed. You can not be mathematically eliminated like the Sabres currently are, but in reality, definitely be eliminated. It would be no short of a miracle if the Sabres at this point, which I believe as of right now, they still currently sit 10 points out of that final wild card spot, which is Tampa. Again, I believe at this moment it is. I know the Islanders won tonight, so that could have potentially mixed up things. I don't think they're quite up there yet, and everything like that. But I know they just have an abundance of overtime losses, so they somehow get points here and there. The playoffs are lost and gone. You have Kevin Adams saying that they don't want to sell things and until it's truly over. Well, the bell, it's coming. You got till Friday this afternoon. That is when the deadline comes and goes. And you have players on this roster that should be leaving. There are two absolute certains. These guys need to go ASAP. And honestly, one of them, it doesn't even matter the return. Then you have another two where they should be leaving this roster. They should be finding different opportunities for a playoff run and doing things for someone else. And it's not because you want to see them gone, but it's because both sides, it's not probably happening after this year. And, it's definitely not happening this year. After this year, there are probably decisions that are going to be made where they will be on the outside of those plans. And you just need to do right by them to send them elsewhere. And then there's kind of rumblings and stuff, discussions on a couple other guys that I will get into as well. But Kevin Adams needs to be a seller. It just is what it is. You need to be selling. You would be kind of failing to do your job appropriately at this time of year if you are not selling as the GM of the Buffalo Sabres in their current predicament. So again, tonight we're going to go through, or I am going to go through. It's going to seem fairly obvious early on, but I'm going to go through some names that realistically you should be hearing, or we will all be hearing come trade deadline time. Again, I'm not saying that all of these guys are going to be moved. I will say some of them definitely better be moved. But overall, these are kind of names that I wouldn't be surprised to hear all the way through Friday, and it will be intriguing to see how this roster looks past that deadline Friday night, and then this team is going to be preparing at that point to be playing. I apologize. They're going to be playing Edmonton. That's right, and and welcoming Connor McDavid into a matinee performance at in Buffalo. So, um, first on this list, the category I have it as is who needs to go ASAP. Who needs to be leaving this roster? Come Friday, these individuals should not be dressed in the blue and gold. These players should no longer be a part of this roster or anything in the future for this team for good reason. And the number one guy is a guy, I'm not even going to leave it out there, Eric Johnson. You're done. Like, Eric, you have had a great career. You have won a cup in your career. You have done so many things. You were a first overall pick, all of that stuff. The return on this guy does not matter. Whatever you get, I fully suspect if you are trading him, when you are trading him, you're getting quote unquote future considerations. That's fine. He has been a shell of himself from basically the get-go with this team, and it is a clear waste of time for both sides, both Eric himself and the Sabres, to have him here any longer. He's been getting scratched. It's just like the time is now. If a contender really wants to bring him on just for his veteran experience or whatever you want to call it, sure. I just don't even know if there's a market for him at this point based on the tape he's been putting out there. That Anaheim game I mentioned, oh my god, a whole bunch of oof. And it hasn't stopped there. If at any point he laced up his skates past that point, he was again abysmal. He has been at one point, and I believe at that point he was already being scratched regularly, but at one point, there was a stretch of games where 8 of the 12 goals allowed were when he was on the ice, and that is just bad. And it was, and honestly, I'm shocked that it wasn't 12 of 12, just because, well, I guess some others have to be allowing goals, but realistically, Eric Johnson was just a clear problem on the blue line, and just you wanted to avoid seeing him out there at all costs. So Eric Johnson needs to be off this roster by Friday. That would be horrible. The other guy I have in this category needs to be gone ASAP. Victor Olofsson. Great years with the Sabres. He's had 3 20+ goal seasons. And someone that I even technically own his jersey, although it's partially because I just love the number 68, the original number he was wearing. It's kind of a disappointment when he switched to 71. But he last dressed for this roster on February 15th. And he is clearly a guy, and this was even being discussed last year at the deadline, going into the offseason. Really felt like Victor Olofsson should be moved at all of these times. And now the time has come. He definitely should be moved. And this is the one where, honestly, if he is still a part of this roster, that is a complete failure on Kevin Adams's part. He should be gone. Victor Olofsson is the kind of guy, he's a classic deadline guy. He's a classic guy that anyone that's trying to get a little bit of an offensive boost or a power play boost, trying to bring in that guy to really bring them over the top so that you can maybe get that depth scoring in there and everything that you need to make a push come the playoffs. He is that guy, and he's a rental. He's going to be a UFA after this season, and the cost for him probably isn't going to be much of anything, being that he's a pending UFA. But overall, you take whatever it is you get for him and you move him along. I believe he even made it publicly known that he wants to be, move on and go find better pasture. Naturally, he wants to play. He wants to go somewhere else where he can get regular ice time. It makes total sense. But yeah, come Friday, Victor Olofsson needs to be gone. So Eric Johnson, Victor Olofsson, 1000% need to be leaving this roster for other rosters by Friday afternoon's deadline. That has to happen. The next category I have here is should go. in order to be with someone that can experience playoff hockey. And this is the category where the name should be readily apparent. It should make total sense. And I shouldn't even have to say their names, and you know exactly who I'm talking about. I'm first going to start with Kyle Okposo because it just feels right to start with the captain of this current Sabres team. I genuinely believe that Kyle Okposo may be in a very conflicted place mentally. There was an interview. I don't know if it was with local news. I know I saw it on Channel 2's news that it was just on in the background, um, where he was essentially asked if he had thought about the fact that the Winnipeg game could be his last home game dressed up in the blue and gold. Well, technically black and red at that point, but dressed up for the Sabres at home. And he dipped his head. He took a very long pause, and he just kind of, with a long exhale, just said, "Yeah, he did give it thought. He has given it some time." And it's one of those things where he doesn't. He reiterated that he doesn't know what the future holds, and it was clearly words being spoken by a guy who has a lot going on between the ears, and it makes total sense. I don't think he has a true desire in leaving Buffalo. I don't think he has any desire to leave the city and leave a place that he's had a footprint for so long. And he's clearly a big part of the organization, or has been, for this team for years and years. And when he signed in free agency, when he signed on that July 1st, years and years ago, I imagine this isn't what he thought that his career would be here, but he has expressed how he has been very happy here. He's made numerous appearances where he's reiterated this. But at the end of the day, this feels like the last year of his career. It was unknown if he would be re-signing with the Sabres. He took a small deal to come back with the Sabres. Not that he needed to take a small deal in order to sign with the Sabres, but he the Sabres extended an offer to him. He came back. And if this is his last year, the player in him, the competitor in him, wants to get one last crack at a run, one last crack at the playoffs, one last chance at potentially winning a championship. And you absolutely cannot blame him. And he 1000% deserves it. It is one of those moves where I don't even know if Kevin Adams wants to make the move. But if you look at it strictly as a business, and if you look at it realistically in this case as well for the benefit of the player, you should be moving him. And I imagine there could be a market for Kyle Okposo. I'm not saying there will be a massive market. I can't imagine that the return will be anything of note really at all. It might be a step or two in front of the future considerations you're getting from Eric Johnson by moving him. I mean, Eric Johnson could even be a cut at this point. But um, it, Kyle Okposo is the kind of player that you bring him into the dressing room. He brings credibility. He brings veteran leadership, of course. He gets it. He just gets it. There's a reason he's been a captain for this team the past couple seasons now. Past few seasons. I don't know if it was 3 years ago he's named it or not, but I can't remember at this moment in time. Regardless, Kyle Okposo should be moved by the deadline, in my opinion, and absolutely deserves it. The other man, of course, is Zemgus Girgensons, another leader in the locker room. And by moving these two guys, I will say, before I kind of get into the Zemgus specific, by moving these guys, what I also think that would do in the locker room is truly create that page turn for the roster, and essentially let everyone know that those individuals were moved out because of their own situations, and that they're deserving to experience playoff hockey elsewhere because it's not happening here. And you just are trying to acquire assets for something that was going to get you nothing come to the end of the season, where you are getting nothing since the playoffs are not coming. And the leadership role holes that they will be filled the leadership holes that they will be leaving and will need to be filled will then start to be at the mind of everyone there. And I think it's going to be a natural transition on who will fill those spots. But overall, that page turn, that reality check, kind of that mini shock to the system is something that I do believe is needed at this point for the roster, for those guys that will be part of the future of the Sabres. And moving them at the deadline is just making sure you get a little bit of something in return for them just trying to figure it out elsewhere. But back to Zemgus. I have this weird thing with Zemgus where it's just going to be very strange, both watching the Sabres without that 28 that was there. It's even more so than when Paul Gostad eventually was gone. It's not like Gostad was here too long, and it's honestly Gergensons is a stature higher than Gostad. But Zemgus Girgensons was a player where you had him on your roster, and it's not like he was a star and he wasn't putting up numbers and all of that stuff, but you knew what he was going to give you every night. You appreciated what he gives you every night. There was I feel like I never heard a complaint about Zemgus Girgensons. I never had a complaint about Zemgus Girgensons. You need individuals like that to be successful. Else, when that time comes, that playoffs come around, and you knew that when playoffs were to come back, that if Zemgus was on this roster, great things could happen. So with that in mind, there's a market for a guy like him. And I imagine there are going to be a few phone calls coming in for Zemgus's services this season for teams that are expected to make the playoffs and need that bottom six kind of guy who are going to put in 40 to 50-second shifts that are absolutely punishing, can get some scoring here and there, and will be a key contributor in success in the playoffs because Zemgus fits that mold so perfectly. He is just someone that it is so easy to understand how successful he can be in the playoffs because he fits that play style so much. And if and when the time comes that he is moved at this deadline, officially it will come to a finality that there is no longer a player in the Sabres organization that technically was here with the last successful roster being with Miller, Vanek, and others. And that the blend there was very short lived. I mean, Vanek was moved very early on in that year. Miller was moved shortly after that, so on and so forth. But finally, that last individual who could say that he was technically a part of the roster with the Sabres, Ryan Miller, and Sabres, Thomas Vanek. That is fascinating in its own self. But Zemgus and Kyle should be moved at the deadline. I would wish them all the best. I will be honest. Wherever Zemgus goes, even if it's a team like Boston, which is naturally where a lot of fans' heads go when it comes to Zemgus because it seems like he just fits the Bruins mold very well. There will be a part of me that's rooting for him, and I will want to see him succeed because you want that feeling like everyone knows how good he can be in the playoffs and how good he could have been for the Sabres come playoff time, and you just want to see that flourish somewhere just to give you that kind of that affirmation that it's like, yes, he is that guy. He can be that guy. And good for him. I'm finally getting the taste of playoffs and experiencing it because he's never been able to experience it before. And he deserves to skate on the ice come playoffs time because he fits that mold entirely. After those four guys, Eric Johnson, Victor Olofsson, absolutely must be moved. Do not have them as part of the Sabres organization come Friday. Well, come Saturday, technically, after Friday. Kyle Okposo, Zemgus Girgensons should be moved for their own reasons. And honestly, just try to get a little bit of a return for them if you can, because you're not going to get anything otherwise. We are moving on to two more guys that I have written down here where I do not want to see these guys moved. And they are probably names you may hear, though, come Friday or up until Friday, because one, I've already heard we've heard both of their names at least some point leading up to this moment anyways. The first name is Casey Middlestat, And you, in all caps, I have it in my notes, do not trade Casey Middlestat if you're in my opinion, unless you're blown away with an offer, all in parentheses. In his best season as a pro, it's a good time for him to be coming up on an RFA, and he's going to get paid. What that number will be, I'm not entirely sure. Casey Middlestat's had a interesting career altogether, but having a career year at this point and clearly showing who he can be this time of year and at this point in his career is good timing on his part. But that shouldn't be an issue for the Sabres at all. Paying Casey Middlestat shouldn't be an issue. Cap and where they are currently, not a problem. Casey is also one of those few players right now on this roster that he fills a lot of roles at a very high end value. And even when injuries come up, he can step into those holes and give you a high caliber player wherever it's needed so that scoring and production do not dip at that level. Right. So we saw it when Tage got hurt late last season. Casey stepped in and the first line did not really miss a beat. We've seen Casey in the past step in as a top six winger and still be very, very productive. And in all honesty, it should show you where they value him behind the bench, because when Cousins was struggling a little bit, they moved him off and brought Casey up to center him. And it kind of kick-started Cousins again a little bit. Then they, put Cousins back in that 2C role and drop Middlestat back to that third center role so that you could spread out your production a little bit better again. And it's, I think that is one of the key contributors to that stretch of good play that we've had of recent for this team. Casey's just a guy that you need. And if the spine moving forward is Tage, Cousins, Middlestat for the next few years, I don't think anyone would be complaining and no one would be batting an eye as like there could be a problem there. I will say, it's like, would I mind someone of maybe a little bit of a different mold being the third center in that true top spine for the Sabres down the middle? Maybe, but I am very, very okay with Middlestat. I love Middlestat as a player. I think he's very, very fun to watch, and he is very good. So you do not move this kind of guy, but he's not technically untouchable. If someone were to step in and just give you an offer that is legitimately too good to refuse, you have to take that offer. With an upcoming RFA, especially, you have to do that. Do I expect anyone to do something that's like a mind-blowing offer? No. I would imagine that will not come. And realistically, what is kind of that blowaway offer? You cannot be having a dip realistically. Like, everyone tries to win a trade, but you better be winning that trade. There better be a reason that someone is willing to give so much up for Middlestat that you have won this trade and you absolutely just cannot say no to it. And it will put you in an even better position down the road because of it. Let's say, a young stud, clear bona fide top four defenseman is involved. NHL defenseman is involved in this, plus other blue chip assets. Then you're starting to talk our language kind of deal. That's the only world I see that happening. I don't find that to be realistic at all. So overall, Casey Middlestat, do not trade. I hope to God Kevin Adams does not trade him again. We'll put it in parentheses, unless you're blown away with an offer. The other one I'm going to bring up may surprise some. And the only reason I bring it up is because you've seen his name out there once or twice by some individuals, but then once again, on the Spit and Chicklets podcast that were released, I'm recording this on Tuesday night. It came out this morning, Tuesday the 5th. Elliot Friedman was on, and he had mentioned how the Rangers, among others teams, have been calling the Sabres for the services of Alex Tuch. So the next player, of course, is Alex Tuch. He immediately followed that up by saying that there was no feeling on his part, and the Sabres are not looking to entertain even a move for Tuch. And that makes total sense. Elliott agreed with that statement. Others find that to be true. It doesn't seem like the Sabres are even attempting to entertain ideas for Tuck. That being said, to counterpoint that and just keep it out there, technically, Tuck is not untouchable. It might feel weird to say that, and it might feel weird to hear that, but there's only two guys, in my opinion, that are truly untouchable on this roster, and they are Dahlin and Tage Thompson. You can probably, due to contract and projected play, excuse me, put Dylan Cousins in that category. But outside of that, and I guess technically there, Owen Power may be there, although his dip and play, sophomore slump, may have put him in the place where if someone were to blow you away with an offer, again, you may listen to it. Dahlin and Tage are your only true untouchables. Outside of that, if someone were to come in and just blow the doors away with an offer to you for Tuck, you find it very, very difficult to say no. And it would be a total shock to everyone inside and out if Kevyn Adams were to move Tuck for anything, because just the move of Tuck out, that would honestly be a shock to even the point I made prior, where where I mentioned that it feels like we know what's coming in the next step when it comes to the leadership. Tuck seems to be involved in that, but never say never, because once in a while, crazy things happen at the deadline, once in a blue moon, and you see someone just get blown away with an offer to try to truly make that push for a cup, and they just feel like an Alex Tuck or a Casey Middlestat are that missing piece that will unlock the key to success and get you that Stanley Cup. So never say never, but the rumors are out there about teams calling, and I would, and I imagine a lot of us would, if not all of us, would be stunned if Alex Tuck was moved at the deadline. So just a few names to throw out there that you may hear, four of which, one more time for the people in the back: Eric Johnson, Victor Olofsson, Kyle Okposo, and Zemgus Girgensons, I would imagine are going to be moved by the deadline. The top two of those absolutely must be moved at the deadline. Casey Middlestat and Alex Tuck, do not move these players unless you're really blown away with an offer. Alex Tuck, more so, just don't even move him. Like, you would have to have franchise changing returns because I do think there's a lot of value in Alex Tuck that even just goes beyond the play on the ice. And there's been a dip in his play this season. I think injury has played a small part in that. And then on top of it, there's been a natural dip to a lot of the guys, where a point I may come up to shortly may see that rise back up, and we will see the better Alex Tuck that we even saw last season. So to wrap it up, we are going to be sellers at the deadline. The one thing I will say is, though, every once in a while we've heard these little rumors that Kevyn Adams or the Sabres have been calling the Blues about Buchnevich. I probably just butchered that name. I can never say it. It's a Russian names, man. They're tough. Buchnevich. And, they have guys out there that they keep their ear to the ground and just kind of see what teams are looking for that player services, and what would it take to get that guy in to then change the dynamic of the roster. I put the chance on something like that happening at the deadline at 4%. You have to pay a lot for players at the deadline. It seems like cost for players is inflated at the deadline. So I put it at 4%, but I'm putting it there because it's not technically saying that it's impossible. We will be sellers at the deadline, but boy, would that be an interesting return if all of a sudden we actually traded for something at the deadline with what I imagine to be eyes on the future because of that player being in the future plans for this team. And somehow they made a deal work at the deadline that made sense for both sides. Would be very, very interesting to see like a Blues Sabres deal happen, because it seems to be that I believe the Blues have been struggling as well in their own right. I know they kind of surged up a little bit, but I don't believe that they're in the mix for playoffs as well. So I don't pay too close attention to the Western Conference. I know they're kind of middle of the pack, high 60s points. Maybe they're still in it, but overall, it sure would be interesting if they were to bring someone in. So trade deadline is going to be here Friday. Very excited for it. Trade deadline in the NHL is a very fun day for me. Even going back to when I was a kid, it always seemed like, I mean, back in the day before we even really had Twitter and stuff like that, like, the last time the Sabres, I'm going to say this, the Dinas Zubris trade and the Steve Bernier trade, like that era, like Twitter was, I think maybe it was Steve Bernier. That might be '08. No, Steve Bernier was, yeah, that would be 2008. Twitter was in its infancy. It was in beta form. Um, it wasn't quite the well molded machine that we have now where you got breaking news at your fingertips like that. Twitter was just more of a fun social media. So you're refreshing, the TSN Trade Center page or whatever it is to see a Sabres logo pop up and everything like that. Or you would, if you were home, you could watch just NHL Network and just get that nonstop coverage from TSN and NHL Network's headquarters and stuff like that. I honestly, when it comes to Friday, I will have a stream on my PC while I'm working or on my TV that is NHL Trade Center, just because the trade deadline in the NHL to me is the most exciting one by far in all of professional sports. And it always seems to be that there's one or two blockbuster moves every year that really does change the landscape of the NHL, mainly for the playoffs, of course, of that season. But overall, it's always a fun time. And I very much look forward to it. One last thing before this episode ends, though, my final thought of the pod. And I may do something like this moving forward where I just have a quote unquote final pod of the thought, a final thought of the pod or the last minute remaining in the period. Um, Lindy Ruff was recently fired from New Jersey, and I can already hear some groans and I see some eye rolls out there. Lindy Ruff was recently fired from New Jersey, and there's obviously a understanding of who he is in the Buffalo Sabres area, and thoughts were all out there in the Twitter sphere and all out there elsewhere as well on their feelings on Lindy Ruff being in the open market, a reunion with the Sabres. Would that be something that they would enjoy or not enjoy seeing? So on and so forth. And my opinion on this, the initial fan in me romanticizing about seeing the man who was behind the bench for all of the most successful moments that this Sabres organization has had in the modern era, coming back and trying to fix this team that has been in shambles ever since he himself was fired. And we saw Ron Rolston and all the other guys come in and try to do whatever it is they could do and do it unsuccessfully. There is a little bit of that giddy excitement in me only because of Lindy Ruff and who he was. When you step aside from that, and this is me, when you step aside from that and you just start looking at the idea of Lindy Ruff and what it seems like he tries to do as a coach of a team, the two things that come to mind in with how he likes to play and what he tries to marry play style wise in his teams to achieve success. It's two things. One thing is high intensity breakout style offense that just creates a ton of offense and a ton of goals from speed and just obviously talent. And you're just run and gun down the throat of teams before they can set up, before anything like that. You don't want to allow opposing teams to even get in any sort of defensive shape or get into any kind of rhythm in the neutral zone as they retreat into their own defensive zone so that they can feel like they can run their system. You're trying to create confusion by playing fast, just breakout play, never let them feel comfortable. That is something this Sabres roster, I do believe, could succeed in. I feel like that's what we kind of saw them succeed in last year. Another thing Lindy Ruff teams do, though, is take that, but then also play within a total team structure that supports defensively. And it always felt like criticisms out there with the style that Lindy used to coach with. It does feel like he had to have adjusted to the times a little bit in his style of coaching. He can't be as critical or harsh on players. It's just not the way modern coaches could succeed. But overall, he brings those stars down to earth and he just wants them to play a team game. And that is something this Sabres team, even going back to last year, it does feel like they've needed because there's clear disconnect when they are setting up in their own defensive zone. It's a clear disconnect when they're trying to defend as a team overall. I will say, it's funny saying that, and a goal even occurred in this thing that's going to come to mind. But technically, you are seeing some moments where the team does understand, who needs to be responsible for what. And like, for instance, the moment I'm bringing up in the Winnipeg game, a lot of people were kind of criticizing how dumb Peyton Krebs looked as he tried to like jump to stop a puck that was about to create a breakout, which it did. And then the shot that was off of that led to a goal for Winnipeg. Peyton Krebs did exactly what his job was. I believe it was on the ice with him was Jacob Bryson on the defensive side who had stepped up in the offensive zone. Jacob Bryson did exactly what he was supposed to do. The reason that shot and goal happened was Owen Power unfortunately didn't step up to the shooter. That shot should never be happening. That was a mistake on Owen Power's fault. Regardless of that, and it wasn't a great shot to let in by UPL, but overall, fault is on Owen Power. It feels though most of the time, this team does not understand team defense. It doesn't understand structure, doesn't understand the little things it needs to do with fork checking and back checking and how to be successful in those worlds and playing on the boards and just suffocating teams. They just don't do that. That is something that I do believe Lindy Ruff teams in the past and also recently when last season, what New Jersey was successful at was still playing that team defensive game while having that breakout offense style that um that they didn't they were a high octane team that still understood the little things that needed to get done defensively to find success. Lindy Ruff could achieve that with them. He has achieved it in the past with Sabres teams of history, and it does feel like something that if Lindy were to return, it would be very intriguing and would almost feel like a good step forward compared to what's happening now with coaching and how this team is performing and what it feels like they need direction wise. So take the fandom away out of it. I still don't mind that if that were to be something that Kevin Adams and or Terry Pagula would be intrigued by in bringing that reunion or making that reunion possible. So just a final thought. I will finalize that thought with I still like the idea of Craig Berube being out there more. I like Craig Berube as a coach. I think he could do a lot of things for this roster as well. But between Berube being available, now Lindy is available, life following Donnie Meatballs, Don Granado, could be coming more and more, in my opinion. That is something that if I even had any remote of a say, would be something I'd be entertaining. So will be fascinating to watch along and see what comes of that. Thank you so much for listening to another episode of Sabres Chat. I do enjoy this like always. If you are not already, be sure to follow me at Sabres Chat Pod on Twitter. Love to interact whenever anyone does. Love to live tweet when possible during Sabres games. Sometimes it's difficult when I'm at it, at the game. It's just one of those things where when you're there, you're just so immersed in the environment or, doing whatever it is you're doing at the game that live tweeting isn't possible, but try to do my best. I try to also just comment on things around the NHL, probably be commenting on some big trades that are happening. Like even this potential crazy rumor that's out there about Vancouver potentially trying to flip Lindholm to Boston in order to then facilitate a trade for Jake Gensel from Pittsburgh. That would be a wild move if that happened in the NHL. Just a crazy thing you don't see too often, where someone traded for a player that thought would get them over the hump and then only to turn and flip them to another team because there have been, things out there that are saying that they're not exactly happy with his play since acquiring him and then going and getting something else. Um, I love doing this. I love hockey. I love the NHL. I love the Sabres. I appreciate you all. Be sure to leave a comment. Like I said, even in the beginning, if you listen to this after the trade deadline and notice that one of my takes were god awful, or leave thoughts on Lindy Ruff and how you feel about that whole situation and or the coaching of the Sabres. Whatever it is, comment below. Subscribe to the channel, of course, for all of your Sabres chat content, as well as Bills chat and Bills content along with that as well. I am Luka. Thank you so much for listening and everything like that. And catch me in 2 weeks on another edition of Sabres Chat. Take care.